The galaxy laughs at Earth. The Zorthan Empire was the most powerful force in the galaxy. For centuries, they had crushed weaker civilizations, expanding their empire without mercy. They believed strength was the only thing that mattered, and to them, humans were weak. Earth was small compared to the great galactic powers. Humanity had only recently begun traveling beyond their solar system, while other empires had been ruling the stars for thousands of years. The Zorthans and their allies saw humans as nothing more than insects, barely worth noticing. That was why they laughed when humanity was invited to the Galactic Summit. The Galactic Summit was a gathering of the most powerful civilizations in the universe. Only the strongest and most advanced species were allowed to attend. The invitation to Earth was not given out of respect. It was a joke. The alien leaders wanted to see the humans up close, to mock them, to remind them of their place. Inside the massive space station, where the summit was held, towering alien warlords sat on their thrones. Their eyes glowed with amusement as the small human delegation walked in. The Zorthan general, his deep red scales reflecting the lights of the chamber, let out a loud guttural laugh. This is what the humans look like. I expected warriors, but they are nothing more than fragile creatures of flesh. The room erupted in laughter. Other species joined in, their voices echoing through the grand hall. The human delegation, led by Admiral Daniel Graves, did not react. He stood tall, his expression calm. Next to him, Dr. Elias Carter, Earth's top scientist, adjusted his glasses but said nothing. The Supreme Chancellor of the Zorthan Empire, a massive reptilian being with golden armor, leaned forward. Tell us, humans, what do you bring to this summit? What do you have that could possibly impress us? One of the other alien leaders sneered. Do you have warships? No. Do you have planet-destroying weapons? No. Then why are you here? More laughter. Admiral Graves finally spoke. His voice was steady. We came because we were invited. The Zorthan Chancellor smirked. Yes, but you were invited as entertainment. You are nothing but a curiosity. The only reason Earth is not already part of our empire is because you are too small to be worth the effort. The aliens laughed again, but this time, something felt off. Dr. Carter met the Chancellor's gaze. There was no fear in his eyes. Instead, there was something else. Confidence. Tell me, Chancellor, Carter said, his voice quiet but firm. Have you ever heard of the U.S. paradox? The room grew silent. The name meant nothing to them. The Chancellor scoffed. What is this paradox? Another one of your pathetic human inventions. Carter smiled. You could say that. Admiral Graves checked his communicator. A faint blue light pulsed on the screen. The signal had been sent. Far beyond the space station, something stirred. The laughter in the chamber slowly died as an alert flashed across every alien's communicator. Something had entered the system. A massive holographic screen appeared in the center of the chamber, showing real-time footage from the station's long-range sensors. A single human ship had just arrived. It looked small, nothing compared to the massive alien battleships surrounding the station. It had no visible weapons, no shields, no markings, just a sleek, black hull that seemed to absorb light. The Zorthan general chuckled. This is your great human ship, a pathetic excuse for a vessel. Another alien leader, a tall, insect-like creature, grinned. It doesn't even have weapons. What do you expect to do with that toy? Then the ship vanished. It didn't jump to hyperspace. It didn't cloak. It simply ceased to exist. The room fell into complete silence. The alien warlord stared at the screen, confused. The Zorthan Chancellor frowned. Where did it go? Dr. Carter smiled. Look behind you. A deep humming sound filled the chamber. Every alien turned toward the massive windows that overlooked space. The human ship was there. It was now right outside the station, floating silently in the void. It had moved across the system in an instant, without any known propulsion, without using any technology they understood. The Zorthan general's claws tightened around his throne. That's impossible. The U.S. paradox pulsed with a strange blue light, and for the first time in history, the most powerful leaders in the galaxy felt something they had never felt before. Fear. Admiral Graves leaned forward. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the chamber, it sounded like thunder. This is just the beginning. The impossible warship. Silence choked the Grand Galactic Summit as every alien warlord, emperor, and general stared out the massive observation windows. The U.S. paradox hovered in the void, an unassuming black vessel pulsing with a strange blue glow. No weapons, no defenses. Yet, in a single instant, it had shattered every known law of physics. The Zorthan general's voice cracked through the silence. This must be some kind of illusion. Dr. Carter adjusted his glasses. You wish it were. The Supreme Chancellor of the Zorthan Empire, still seated on his massive throne, clenched his claws against the golden armrests. His people had conquered hundreds of worlds, their war fleets unstoppable. But now, staring at this human ship, he felt something deep and unfamiliar gnaw at him. Doubt. The holographic display flickered, analyzing the paradox. Every scan sent back the same result. Nothing. No engine readings. No life signs. It was as if the ship didn't exist. This is a trick. Another alien leader hissed, his many eyes darting across the screen. Humans are primitives. There is no way they cooled. Then, the ship moved again. Not forward. Not backward. Not through hyperspace. It simply changed position, now appearing above the summit station, hovering like a silent god. The alien warlords stood from their seats. Their entire security fleets surrounded the summit station. Hundreds of warships, bristling with planet-cracking weaponry, were locked onto the lone human vessel. The Chancellor sneered, forcing his fear down. Destroy it. A moment later, the void erupted in fire. Beams of pure plasma. Kinetic rounds traveling near light speed. Gravity torpedoes designed to collapse entire moons. A storm of destruction tore through space. And then, nothing. The blasts never reached the paradox. They simply vanished, swallowed by an invisible force before even coming close. It was as if the universe itself had refused to allow the ship to be harmed. The Zorthan general staggered back, his eyes wide. That's not possible. For the first time in centuries, an entire galactic armada had failed to even scratch a single ship. Inside the chamber, Admiral Graves let the moment sink in. Then he finally spoke. We are not here to fight you. His voice was calm, absolute. We are here to warn you. The Chancellor's golden eyes narrowed. Warn us. Dr. Carter folded his hands. Tell me, Supreme Chancellor, do you believe in higher dimensions? The question made no sense. But deep inside, the Chancellor felt a cold dread slither into his mind. Explain. Carter exhaled. You believe humans are weak because we are new to the galactic stage, but you never considered that we might have discovered something you could never understand. He gestured to the paradox. This ship does not exist in your reality alone. It moves in 7 dimensions, outside the rules you follow. It does not travel through space. It does not need weapons, because the very fabric of the universe bends to it. The room stayed dead silent. Then Graves leaned forward, locking eyes with the Chancellor. And you just fired on it. A deep, impossible sound rumbled through the chamber. It was coming from outside. The paradox was no longer just a ship. It was changing, expanding, warping. Space itself twisted around it, like reality was being rewritten by something far beyond mortal understanding. For the first time, the galaxy truly saw what it had mocked. Not a weak species, not a joke, but a force far beyond anything they could comprehend. And it was just getting started. The day reality shattered. A deep humming vibration rippled through the Grand Galactic Summit, sending waves of unease through every alien present. The walls trembled. The stars outside flickered, glitching, as if the universe itself was struggling to process what it was witnessing. The U.S. paradox was no longer just a ship. It was becoming something else. The Zorthan general's breathing was ragged. His war-hardened mind could not accept what his eyes saw. "Chancellor," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "We need to leave. Now." The Supreme Chancellor of the Zorthan Empire didn't move. His golden eyes remained locked on the impossible vessel outside, his claws gripping the armrests of his throne with enough force to bend the metal. He had spent his entire reign laughing at humanity, dismissing them as a weak, primitive species barely worthy of recognition. Now he couldn't even comprehend the ship they had created. This is madness," an Itheri diplomat stammered, his tendrils curling in distress. "No species cold. Space folded. Not like a wormhole, not like a jump drive." It cracked. A fracture split across the void, glowing with an eerie blue light. The paradox no longer had a clear shape. It was shifting, existing in multiple places at once, flickering in and out of dimensions that no one else could perceive. And then, for a fraction of a second, the galaxy saw it. Not the ship. What was inside? Every screen in the chamber flickered to static. The lights dimmed. Shadows deepened, stretching in ways that defied all logic. The Chancellor's mind screamed as something vast and incomprehensible gazed back at him through the void. It was not human. It was beyond human. A presence that should not exist in this reality. A being that had transcended the very concept of three-dimensional life. The Zorthan general staggered back, his claws trembling. "Shut it down," he bellowed. "Seal the summit. Close all communication links." Dr. Carter's voice was calm. Too calm. "There's no closing this door, General." The fracture widened. The stars outside tilted, as if space itself was warping around the paradox's presence. Massive battlecruisers that had once dominated the void now drifted helplessly, their systems failing, their crews paralyzed by something far greater than any weapon. The Supreme Chancellor finally found his voice. "Human, what have you done?" Admiral Graves exhaled. He didn't smile. He didn't boast. His voice was low, steady, a warning wrapped in steel. "We didn't build a warship. We built an answer." The paradox vanished. Not into hyperspace, not into any known dimension. It simply ceased to be. And in its place, the fabric of reality itself rippled outward, an aftershock of its impossible existence. A deep, deafening silence filled the chamber. For the first time in history, the galaxy stopped laughing at humanity and started fearing them. The fear of the unknown. The Supreme Chancellor of the Zorthan Empire had faced countless wars. He had crushed rebellions, ordered planets to be razed to ash, and led conquests that spanned entire star systems. He had never known fear. Until now. The U.S. paradox had disappeared, but its presence remained, like a shadow stretching across the very fabric of reality. The void outside was unnaturally still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The grand galactic summit had descended into chaos. Alien diplomats whispered in frantic voices, their translators struggling to keep up with the panic. Fleet commanders sent desperate signals to their warships, but their systems remained frozen, shields down, weapons useless, engines offline. Nothing worked. Something had changed, and no one knew how or why. The Zorthan general grabbed his communicator. "Scramble the fleets. Pull back. Static." His eyes widened. The entire communication network was dead. A cold realization settled over the chamber. The galaxy had never experienced this kind of silence before. Dr. Carter watched them carefully. His expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. They don't understand. They can't. The paradox hadn't just vanished. It had left a scar in reality. Something unseen was still here. Something watching. Admiral Graves finally spoke, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You wanted to conquer us." The Supreme Chancellor turned, his golden eyes burning with barely contained rage. "We were generous to your kind," he hissed. "We tolerated your presence. We." Graves stepped forward. "You mocked us." Silence. "You thought humanity was weak. You saw us as children, barely worth acknowledging." His gaze swept across the room, locking onto each leader, each warlord, each emperor. "You never once considered the possibility that we had discovered something you never could." His next words sent a chill through every alien in the room. "We are no longer bound by the same universe as you." The Etheri diplomat's tendrils curled inward, his voice a hushed tremor. "What? What does that mean?" Dr. Carter folded his hands. "It means we learned how to step outside." The room dimmed. No alarms blared. No power failures were detected. And yet, shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. A cold, suffocating presence coiled through the chamber, a feeling older than time itself. Something shifted. For a single moment, every alien in the room felt an impossible sensation, as if their bodies no longer fully existed within this dimension. And then, it was gone. The Supreme Chancellor staggered, gripping the edges of his throne as if reality itself had tilted beneath him. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind reeling. The U.S. paradox had touched something beyond the known universe, and it had brought back knowledge no species was meant to have. Graves took a deep breath. "We did not come here to declare war." His eyes darkened. "We came here to warn you." The room felt too small, the air too thin. The Etheri diplomat's voice was barely above a whisper. "Warn us of what?" Dr. Carter met his gaze. "Humanity has stepped into something new, something greater." He glanced at the Chancellor. "And now it knows you exist." A cold shudder rippled through the chamber. No one dared to ask what it was. For the first time in galactic history, the ruling empires felt truly helpless, and they weren't sure if humanity was their greatest ally or their doom. The fracture in reality. The silence in the Grand Galactic Summit was unbearable. The most powerful beings in the universe, warlords, chancellors, emperors, sat frozen, their minds struggling to grasp what had just happened. The U.S. paradox was gone, not destroyed, not in hyperspace, just gone. And yet, its presence lingered. The Zorthan general, his claws still trembling, turned to the Supreme Chancellor. "We need to act," he said, barely keeping his voice steady. "If the humans have discovered something beyond our understanding, we must." The room flickered. Not the lights, not the screens. Reality itself. For a brief, horrifying moment, the entire chamber shifted, as if existence itself had been knocked slightly out of place. Walls twisted imperceptibly. The ceiling expanded and contracted, like a living thing taking a breath. Some aliens screamed. Others simply sat there, paralyzed, their minds unable to process what their senses were telling them. Then it was over. The room returned to normal. But everyone had felt it. Dr. Carter slowly exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It's starting." Admiral Graves' jaw tightened. "We warned you," he said, his voice steel cold. "You mocked us. You thought we were beneath you. And now, because of your arrogance." He gestured to the space outside, where the fracture still lingered, a crack in the void that refused to heal. "Something else is watching." The Supreme Chancellor's golden eyes were filled with something that had never existed there before, pure, unfiltered terror. "This is a deception," he whispered. "It must be a trick." Dr. Carter gave a small, sad smile. "You wish it was." The Etheri diplomat was shaking uncontrollably, his tendrils curled so tightly they were turning pale. What did you unleash?" Admiral Graves' voice was heavy. "We didn't unleash anything." He looked up at the fracture, at the endless darkness swirling beyond it. "We just opened the door." The Zorthan general slammed his fist against the table. "Then we must close it." His voice was raw, desperate. "You humans, fix this. Shut the door before it's too late." Dr. Carter's smile faded. "It is too late." The fracture pulsed. Not outward, inward. Like something on the other side was pushing through. The Ithari diplomat whimpered, his voice barely audible. "We were never alone, were we?" Dr. Carter didn't answer. Because deep inside, he wasn't sure humanity was alone anymore either. The thing that should not be, the single pulse. It rippled across the summit chamber, across the galaxy itself. Unseen, unheard, but felt. A tremor that crawled through every sentient mind, like a whisper from the void. And then the fracture widened. Not much, barely a fraction of a degree, but enough. Enough for something on the other side to notice. The Supreme Chancellor of the Zorthan Empire gripped his throne with bone-white knuckles. His breath came in shallow gasps, his twin hearts hammering against his ribs. The most powerful leader in the known universe, and yet he felt like prey. Admiral Graves stood tall, his face unreadable. He wasn't afraid, or at least he refused to show it. "Whatever you did," the Chancellor growled, his voice barely above a whisper, "undo it." Dr. Carter didn't blink. "It doesn't work like that." The Ithari diplomat clutched his translator device, his tendrils twitching uncontrollably. "We are not built for this," he muttered, his mind unraveling. "We are meant to exist in 3 dimensions, 4 at most. What happens when something higher notices us?" The Zorthan general's breathing was ragged. "We need." The stars blinked. Not the lights, not the screens, the actual stars. Across the void of space, entire sectors vanished for a fraction of a second, as if something had momentarily stepped between them and reality. The Supreme Chancellor lurched forward, his claws digging into the table. What was that? Admiral Graves' expression was grim. "That," he said slowly, "was acknowledgement." It had seen them. The fracture pulsed again. The summit chamber dimmed, though no one touched the controls. The air itself grew thicker, pressing against them. Something was reaching through. Something that had no name. Something that should not be. The Ithari diplomat collapsed onto the floor, his body spasming. "No, no, this isn't real," he whimpered. "We're dreaming. A glitch in the data. The walls shifted. They didn't move, not in the way physical things should. Instead, for a single horrifying moment, they became suggestions of walls, outlines, ideas, no longer bound by form. Then reality snapped back. The Supreme Chancellor vomited. His elite guards, trained to fight in the most brutal conditions in the universe, screamed. Admiral Graves sighed. He turned to Dr. Carter, his voice devoid of emotion. "How long do we have?" Dr. Carter didn't answer immediately. He stared at the fracture, at the swirling non-color beyond it, at the terrible truth pressing against the edges of his mind. Then, finally, he spoke. "We are past time." The chamber erupted into chaos. Leaders bellowed desperate orders. Fleets were mobilized. Emergency warp jumps were calculated. Every empire, every species, every nation raced for an answer. An escape, a solution, anything. But the humans knew. There was no escaping this. Something had noticed them. And now, it was coming through. The door opens. The fracture pulsed one final time. Not a ripple, not a tremor. It was a heartbeat. The summit chamber was no longer filled with shouting. No more screams. No desperate arguments. Every being in the room had fallen silent, their eyes locked onto the swirling, incomprehensible rift in space. And then, it stepped through. It had no shape, no form, no name that could be spoken. It wasn't a creature, nor a ship, nor a force. It was something else entirely. The walls of reality bent around it like a body struggling to contain a soul too vast. The very concept of space and time seemed to shudder in its presence. Admiral Graves exhaled. His fingers curled into fists. Containment was never an option. The Supreme Chancellor tried to speak, but no words came. He clawed at his throat, his voice stolen by the sheer wrongness of what stood before them. The Ithari diplomat had ceased moving altogether. His tendrils had withered, his once brilliant eyes turned milky white. The Zorthan general, gone. His seat was empty. No one had seen him leave. Dr. Carter took a slow step forward, his voice steady. "We didn't call it," he said. "We just proved we existed." The entity did not move, or perhaps it did, in ways the mind could not process. The Supreme Chancellor finally found his voice. "You humans did this." His words were barely above a whisper. "You doomed us all." Admiral Graves did not look at him. His eyes were locked on the thing that had arrived. It was watching them. Not with eyes, not with senses that could be understood, but they all felt it. A weight pressing against their minds. A question. A decision being made. The fracture behind it widened. The universe shrank. Dr. Carter exhaled slowly. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "We were never meant to be noticed." And then, the stars vanished. For an infinite moment, the universe was nothing but silence. And then, the universe was rewritten.